Hey out there, all you beautiful internet people. As I film this, it's one of the coldest days on record in Colorado. It's around -5 degrees Fahrenheit outside, so I figured, why not do a review of Ghostbusters as a franchise? That's right, I'm not just talking about one film in the Ghostbusters franchise. I'm talking about a broad retrospective. Let's get into it. Obviously, the Ghostbusters films are widely analyzed, both for their cultural impact, their writing, their filmography, the amount of technique that goes into them. But I think I offer a unique perspective in that I like Ghostbusters 2016. As a matter of fact, one of the first videos I ever uploaded here on YouTube, the first review I ever made, was on Ghostbusters 2016. And that was all the way back in 2019 when only 3 years had passed. Now 6 years have passed since Ghostbusters 2016 was made. As someone who wasn't alive in the 1980s and therefore was unable to appreciate Ghostbusters 1 and 2 when they came out, Ghostbusters 2016 was the closest thing I got to an effective Ghostbusters release where I got to enjoy the fervor of ghost-busting hype. I never really understood the popularity of Ghostbusters as a film, mostly because there are much more effective comedies with each of the cast members. Caddyshack, with Bill Murray as the groundskeeper, is a much funnier movie than Ghostbusters on nearly every level, a technical achievement with arguably a better cast. Nothing But Trouble, on the other hand, directed by Dan Aykroyd, is, I think, a much better expression of what we might call the Aykroydian tendency, in that it reflects a pure Aykroyd vision. Ghostbusters was so heavily impacted by Harold Ramis's interference and the interference of the studio at large, it really doesn't have the kind of mania that you get from an actual Dan Aykroyd project like Dr. Detroit or Nothing But Trouble, both of which I feel are superior films to Ghostbusters in just about every conceivable way. That said, I do understand why Ghostbusters is a widely marketable franchise because it's rated PG-13, whereas Caddyshack is rated R. So obviously you're going to have a lot more merchandise and a lot more kid-friendly advertising for Ghostbusters than you'd ever have for Caddyshack. Ghostbusters is not an edgy franchise. It's very market-tested, safe, researched, and relatively predictable. You know what you're getting into with a Ghostbusters movie as opposed to Caddyshack. Those who go into Caddyshack don't really know what to expect and come out completely changed. In that sense, I think Caddyshack is comparable to a baptism. Ghostbusters, I will say this, is an interesting series in that despite its broad commercial appeal, it was mismanaged and mishandled all kinds of ways, to the point where you don't even know what Ghostbusters is anymore. Ghostbusters 1 was, of course, a cultural touchstone, a moment in time when Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis and Ernie Hudson came together to save the world from ghosts. Then you have Ghostbusters 2, which for whatever reason, some people say is bad, even though it's a perfectly serviceable sequel. Then there was just nothing. There was just nothing. For 20, 30 straight years, there was nothing. And I always thought there was a Ghostbusters 3, because I had Ghostbusters 1 and 2 on VHS, and I was like, well, there's obviously Ghostbusters 3, but I guess it's on DVD or something, because I don't have it, but surely there's a Ghostbusters 3. I mean, given that the first two movies were so successful and so marketable, and they sold a shit ton of toys and action figures and all this crap, why wouldn't there be a third one? Why wouldn't you bring back these four guys and have them bust ghosts again and just make a shit ton of money? Why wouldn't Ghostbusters, like any profitable franchise, be milked to the ground like Star Wars and Marvel and everything have been? I think it's because, despite Ghostbusters being widely appealing to a commercial audience, it is still kind of a risk, given that It was created by Dan Aykroyd, and Dan Aykroyd's ideas tend to be a little wonky if you catch the drift. I mean, sure there's ghosts, but I feel that the Ghostbusters franchise tackles the concept of ghosts in a way that no previous franchise really had. It deals with the commodification of the spiritual realm, which is, on its face, an extremely abstract concept, and requires a lot of societal commentary and a lot of biting cynicism. And that's not exactly the thing, perhaps, that Ghostbusters 3 was willing to serve up on. Now add to this the complication of Harold Ramis's death. I do not get why this was an obstacle at all in just getting a serviceable Ghostbusters 3 out in like 2007 or something, with just Ernie Hudson, Bill Murray, and Dan Aykroyd. That would have been a perfectly serviceable solution, even if Harold Ramis was dead. I like Harold Ramis's screenplays, and he's a decent director too, but the guy has zero screen presence. He's about as appealing on screen as a hunk of cardboard. When I watched Ghostbusters, I didn't even notice he was there because his character, Egon, is so fucking boring. Like, I get that he's dead, and I have immense respect for him as a director and screenwriter, but as an actor, holy shit, he does not know how to act or even carry like a basic joke. You don't watch Ghostbusters for Harold Ramis, let's be honest. You watch it for Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Ernie Hudson, who's easily like the most appealing of the bunch because he's the newbie. You don't even notice Harold Ramis. He just fades into the background. Not making a Ghostbusters 3 just because Harold Ramis wasn't going to be in the picture would be like refusing to make a new National Lampoon's Vacation just because Cousin Eddie wasn't going to be in it. Like, you don't really care about that part. It's not the main focus, you know. The Griswolds are the main... You don't care about Cousin Eddie, right? That's what it's like. Like, who cares about Egon? You care about freaking... I forget all their names. I don't care about their character names. You care about Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd. They're like the main two Ghostbusters. You don't care about Harold Ramis. Like, I'm sure if Ernie Hudson had died, you could make a Ghostbusters 3, but Harold Ramis, the fourth Ghostbuster, the Ghostbuster you don't even notice because he's always standing off to the side and doing nothing of any consequence or importance. This, I think, would have been the ideal scenario for a Ghostbusters 3. Get this, Rick Moranis becomes the fourth Ghostbuster. He's nerdy, just like Harold Ramis, but he's much funnier and a much better actor and much more skilled with dialogue and witticisms. And it would also make sense for his character arc, given that in the first Ghostbusters, he's a hapless bystander who's sucked into the interdimensional goings-on by pure coincidence. And in Ghostbusters 2, he dons the Ghostbuster outfit for the first time, goes out on a ghost-busting adventure, and tries to help the main four, but ends up staggering behind, which is a fun scenario. But in the third one, he could just become the fourth Ghostbuster, full time. That would be perfect. It would make narrative sense, and it would fill the nerdy void of the Ghostbusters, and I think Rick Moranis is easily the highlight of the first two, and much funnier and more interesting and more memorable than Harold Ramis. The fact that Rick Moranis never got to be officially a Ghostbuster is a vast injustice, a disservice to his talent. With all that said, I think Ghostbusters 2016 is probably the best possible outcome we could have asked for. A Ghostbusters film where all three of the remaining Ghostbusters do make reappearances with cameos, but instead of dwelling too long on the past in a franchise that, in all honesty, is dead at this point, we reboot it completely with a bold new cast and a bold new direction. Melissa McCarthy, Kate McKinnon, Leslie Jones, and Kristen Wiig are easily four of the funniest female comedians of the 2010s. Nay, simply the funniest comedians, regardless of gender, and I think it's the perfect lineup, with so much fucking chemistry. Paul Feig's 2016 Ghostbusters is a near-flawless movie. It's easily as good as the original Ghostbusters. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's better, But given that Ghostbusters is not as good as National Lampoon's Vacation, or Caddyshack, or Nothing But Trouble, or The Blues Brothers, or a bunch of other movies with the original SNL cast, I don't think it's that hard to make a movie that's as good as the original Ghostbusters. 2016 Ghostbusters easily clears that. I find it bizarre that this film was caught up in political discourse about whether or not the Ghostbusters should be female, whether women can bust ghosts. Ghostbusting is an imaginary job, so I don't think gender is a factor. Like, how do you, Ben Shapiro, know whether women are less capable of catching ghosts? Have you ever caught a ghost, Paul Joseph Watson? You ever caught a ghost, Dave Rubin? I don't think you have. How do you know if it takes physical strength? You've never done it. Nobody's ever done it. Ghosts aren't fucking real. It's a fictional fantasy movie. It's not a real thing. The fact that gender was brought up, like, I get it if they were like construction workers. They're Ghostbusters. That's not a job that one gender would necessarily do. It doesn't require physical strength. It doesn't require like anything that's innately tied to gender. Even if we go off like a binary sense of gender, who's to say women can't do it better? It's an imaginary job. What a weird point to bring up. What a weird thing to make an argument about. It'd be like saying like men are better like wizards. You don't know that because it's not real. There's no way to prove it because, like, it's made up. Nonetheless, I thoroughly enjoyed Ghostbusters 2016, and I maintain to this day that it is Chris Hemsworth's best movie. It's better than any of the Thor movies, and I think as the Secretary, replacing the role of Annie Potts in the original, it's a fantastic little bending of the gender dichotomy and the way they objectify him as this hapless beefcake. And I think it's definitely one of his best roles. And of course, all three of the original Ghostbusters appear in cameos. And that's really the best you could ask for, because Bill Murray was fucking sick of it, Dan Aykroyd was sick of it, and Ernie Hudson was sick of it, and you can just tell none of them want to be there, and they think, wow, these four female Ghostbusters are now going to helm the franchise and be the new Ghostbusters and be in sequels. Maybe one sequel, maybe two, who knows? But that never happened. And now there's never going to be a second Ghostbusters movie with that hilarious female cast, which has so much innate chemistry and enthusiasm. Overall, just bring such a nice charisma and, like, talent to the role. I don't get it. I don't get why people hate on movies with talented comedians anymore. Like, I've noticed the same thing with Adam Sandler movies. People just shit on them. Now, if you don't like Ghostbusters 2016, it doesn't mean you're a sexist. It just means you don't know what humor is. You don't have a good sense of humor. You probably never watched the original Ghostbusters or Ghostbusters 2. You probably don't understand those movies at all, and you sure as hell haven't watched anything else with Bill Murray or Dan Aykroyd, like Blues Brothers or whatever. You're just using Ghostbusters 2016 as a political talking point. You're just moving it around like a pawn, even though you have zero investment in Ghostbusters or in the franchise. You don't even care about movies. I'm looking at you, Dave Rubin. You've probably never watched a good movie in your fucking life. You probably just watch Matt Walsh documentaries, you hack. So now we have Ghostbusters Afterlife. I'm going to be honest, when the teaser for Ghostbusters Afterlife dropped and you see the Ecto-1 in that garage, I thought, wow, you know, maybe Reitman's son can put together a competent follow. Maybe this won't be as good as Ghostbusters 2016, but maybe it'll be worth watching. And then the trailer dropped. And when I saw this trailer in theaters, I didn't know it was for a Ghostbusters movie. It looked like a small-town teen rom-com or a coming-of-age flick, like the fucking Miseducation of Cameron Post or something. I had no idea it was a Ghostbusters movie until it showed the Ecto-1, and then I was like, holy fuck, this is what the new Ghostbusters movie is going to be about? Some little kids on a fucking farm? Some Tom Sawyer shenanigans? This is what Ghostbusters has devolved into now? You see, call me crazy, the first two Ghostbusters work because they're about imminent threats to big cities, specifically New York City, which I'm not a very big fan of. I'm bored with movies set in New York, but at least it feels like a big threat. When you take the threat of ghosts and you just put it out in the middle of fucking Kansas or something, what am I supposed to be scared of? That the ghosts are gonna take over Kansas in its flat pancake landscape and like the 10,000 people who live there? Wow, what a gosh dang high-stakes, action-packed film we've got here. The ghosts are threatening Nebraska. Oh my gosh, wow, this is such a high-stakes tension mobile. It'd be like if you set Godzilla on like the middle of the Russian steppe and Godzilla was just pouncing around like empty farmland for 2 hours. Who'd watch that? You watch him destroy Tokyo because that's exciting and fun. There's no threat if the big threat, the big world-ending catastrophe is out in the middle of fucking nowhere and like there's no point. But the biggest insult to legitimate Ghostbusters fans such as myself was that the cast included Finn Wolfhard of Stranger Things fame. Stranger Things, which I've made a video on before, is a complete embarrassment to 1980s culture, 1980s nostalgia. It's one of the most nostalgia-bait garbage piles I've ever seen. And the fact that Finn Wolfhard is in it was confirmation to me that it was going to be a fucking disaster. Absolute fucking trash from top to bottom. Then you had Paul Rudd in there. If you thought Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig and Kate McKinnon and Leslie Jones weren't funny, you think Paul Rudd is funny? He's the kind of bland comedian like Jonah Hill or Steve Carell with like zero potential. Paul Rudd is not funny and has no place in a fucking Ghostbusters movie. Add to this that the three original Ghostbusters don't even get that much screen time. They don't get that much more screen time than in Ghostbusters 2016, and most of the screen time is taken up by these annoying fucking kids and Paul Rudd, like these freaking 16-year-olds. It's like you'd rather see the ghost-busting mantle taken up by a bunch of 16-year-olds and Paul Rudd than by like 4 competent adult women who have great chemistry and are funny and interesting to watch. You'd rather see Finn Wolfhard and Paul Rudd. What is wrong with people? Anyway, Ghostbusters Afterlife is an extremely underwhelming conclusion to the Ghostbusters franchise, and I don't think there's going to be another Ghostbusters movie. I guess I'll be proven wrong or right in however many decades' time, but I really doubt the so-called new Ghostbusters, frickin' Finn Wolfhard and the Little Rascals bunch, are going to have as much innate screen chemistry as the original Ghostbusters or the 2016 Ghostbusters, because Finn Wolfhard isn't that great an actor. And call me crazy, but I just see him going the same route as Macaulay Culkin and all these other child actors. You know, you don't have any roles, you just become an alcoholic and you just get depressed and burn out. That's probably what's going to happen to the entirety of the Stranger Things cast. Probably the most offensive bit, however, about Ghostbusters Afterlife is how the entire plot revolves around Harold Ramis's character and his death. And like, that didn't need to be a part of Ghostbusters 3. You could have just said that he died. You don't have to have the entire plot revolve around him, because you could have come up with a new plot that's like, you know, you could just say, oh, he died. We're gonna fight cool fucking ghosts now. We're gonna fight another world-ending threat. Instead, what we've got is a story of lineage where Harold Ramis's character hands on the responsibility to the next generation like he's a Jedi master or something, which is not Harold Ramis's character at all. Egon is like a frail nerd who just like backs away into the corner of the screen and doesn't do anything of any narrative importance, so it's not like he'd be like this bold ghost warrior. It also brings in the unhealthy and weird dynamic that suddenly your entire job revolves around catching and abusing the rights of your deceased former coworker. Like when you take into account that Harold Ramis is also a ghost along with all the other ghosts, that's kind of disturbing. In most of the series, you don't really tend to think about how, like, the ghosts are actually dead people. They're just more like, you know, zany cartoon abominations. Slimer is a lot less fun to think about when you consider that before he died, he was probably like a morbidly obese homeless guy or something. Then it becomes a lot less fun to point and laugh at the funny, wacky, fat ghosts when you consider that, like, you know, he used to be like a real guy who probably lived a hard life. But not to worry, Ghostbusters Afterlife doesn't have Slimer, because who'd want a Ghostbusters movie with Slimer? I mean, he's only the most recognizable character in the entire fucking franchise. It'd be like having a Star Wars movie where Yoda doesn't come in as a Force ghost. I mean, call me crazy, but I think the reason the new Star Wars movies worked is because they had characters that you know and enjoy from the original. The Ghostbusters movie, on the other hand, it doesn't even nostalgia bait. It doesn't even have the shit that people enjoy from the original. There's no big city, there's no Slimer, there's no Stay Puft Marshmallow Man unless you count the tiny little Marshmallow Man that Paul Rudd sees in that one scene. And those aren't like big marshmallow men that can take a big marshmallow shit on you, so it's not funny like the original Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was in Ghostbusters 1, where the whole gag was that he was big and sticky and posed a big sticky marshmallow threat, as opposed to these little tiny marshmallow men who just cause a little bit of mischief. They tone down the intensity and absurdity of the premise and make everything boring and dead. So I think Afterlife is a pretty fitting title for Ghostbusters 4, or I guess technically Ghostbusters 3, because Ghostbusters 2016 takes place in a continuity that's funny. Ghostbusters 3 Afterlife, I'm not even sure if it is Ghostbusters 3 because it doesn't even call itself that, does take place in a kind of narrative afterlife. The point at which the entire plot, the entire point that these movies existed, it's been gone for so long. The life has been sucked out of these movies so much, and it's just a bunch of sad 40-year-olds who own Ghostbuster costumes and build their entire personality around that. And they're just like, I was back in the 80s and it was Ghostbusters and there was Slimer and it was fucking awesome. That's the only target audience for this Ghostbusters movie. Which is sad, because when the original Ghostbusters came out, it was legitimately a revolutionary film that challenged what horror could be and what comedy could be and what a horror comedy could be. And I think that's something Ghostbusters is no longer capable of. Even more worrying, I don't think we have real visionaries like Dan Aykroyd anymore, who are willing to make unorthodox films with unorthodox premises like Nothing But Trouble, which is easily one of the most creative and artistic and interesting major studio productions you'll ever watch. Those of you who like Ghostbusters, or just for those of you who are into comedies or horror comedies or really anything, I can't recommend Nothing But Trouble enough. It is a fantastic movie, and I would say around 5 times better than Ghostbusters, both narratively, character-wise. The sets are fantastic, easily better than anything in Ghostbusters. But for those of you who do like Ghostbusters, I have no idea what you see in Ghostbusters Afterlife, And I think the rejection of Ghostbusters 2016 just because it has women in it is fucking stupid, and one of the biggest mistakes any fan base has ever made. It is absurd to think that people hold a grudge against Ghostbusters 2016 just because there's women in it. Ghostbusters Afterlife, with its teaser trailer with the Ecto-1, gave everyone the false promise that there was actually going to be a third Ghostbusters with just the original 3 Ghostbusters that you give a shit about. But that's not the case. Ghostbusters Afterlife is as much a reboot as Ghostbusters 2016, except instead of 4 extremely competent female comedians at the helm, you have 3 kids and frickin' Paul Rudd as Mr. Gooberson, or whatever his stupid name is. I remember one scene in particular from the trailer where Paul Rudd gathers the new Ghostbusters around and points to old footage from Ghostbusters 1 on the computer and says, "It was like The Walking Dead." First off, it wasn't like The Walking Dead because they're Ghostbusters. They don't bust zombies. Also, this is to imply that in the Ghostbusters timeline, The Walking Dead still exists, like as a show, which I don't really think it would, because after the confirmation of the existence of ghosts back in the 1980s, I think the genre of horror in the Ghostbusters universe would look a little different, to say the least. It would be a little different. I'm not exactly sure the conditions which created The Walking Dead would still be there in a world where ghosts and shit exist. But also, I think the strangest thing about this scene with Mr. Goober Brains, or whatever the fuck his name is, Paul Rudd, one of the world's least intriguing bland comedians, is that he has to actually tell these kids, like, about the Ghostbuster incident, as if they wouldn't already know. Like, I think if you have an incident as big as, like, a giant fucking marshmallow man walking around New York City, and, you know, like, goes around top of the building, I don't think, like, anyone in the Ghostbusters universe would be unaware of the existence of the Ghostbusters. Both events portrayed in both of the Ghostbusters movies would be at least as impactful as 9/11. I mean, in one, there's, you know, the Statue of Liberty comes alive and starts walking around, and there's like a river of slime. I feel like Finn Wolfhard's character and the other annoying toddler characters would probably already be aware of the Ghostbusters. I really doubt that the Ghostbusters would, like, vanish into memory and, like, nobody would remember them, and it'd be like, oh yeah, I remember the Ghostbusters. A lot of people have forgotten about the Ghostbusters. Like, I don't think anyone would ever forget the incidents depicted in Ghostbusters 1 or 2. I'm pretty sure, like, after the confirmation of the existence of the supernatural, everyone would be like, oh yeah, the Ghostbusters, like the biggest fucking celebrities on the planet, like the people who single-handedly saved New York twice. So I just think that's a really funny little continuity error, and I think it's funny that it's compared to The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead's a piece of shit show. Just watch Night of the Living Dead. Much fucking better shit. Much better shit. I've become a lot more profane since my first Ghostbusters review. Long time ago that was. All the way back in 2019. How times have changed. At any rate, I think the mishandling of the Ghostbusters franchise can solely be placed on the arms of Sony, and just how they don't really understand how to properly market or tap into a commercial potential as big as Ghostbusters, especially now that it's been so long since Ghostbusters 2. This series is dead, but it didn't die in the normal way where you just don't have sequels. It died in an extremely interesting way where there was a really good reboot that everyone hated for no reason, and then there was a shit reboot that people reluctantly agreed to pretend was good, even though it was actually ass. And I think that's just a very interesting way to go out. It's kind of like it's dead, but it's not dead. Like an afterlife, you might say. Anyway, at the end of this video, I figure I should recommend a fan film. It's called Return of the Ghostbusters, and instead of dealing with the New York Ghostbusters, it deals with a team of Denver Ghostbusters. And as a Denverite myself, and someone who takes pride in the fact that I live in this city and was born in this city and take this city seriously, there's nothing cooler than to see a bona fide, dedicated team of Ghostbusters right here in Denver. Now, of course, the film breaks copyright law, so it's uploaded for free in its entirety here on YouTube, just being a fun little fan film. But it's easily, I think, a great tribute to Ghostbusters that really understands what made Ghostbusters great, complete with a really cool cold open scene at the beginning, followed by a really cool rendition of the Ghostbusters theme song. So I'd recommend that any Ghostbusters fans go watch Return of the Ghostbusters, which is absolutely a very cool Ghostbusters fan project. And I think just goes to show like how out of touch Sony is compared to what like fans are able to cobble together. It's a really great film, and I don't see enough people talk about it. Like, it's really good and way, way fucking better than Ghostbusters Afterlife. Anyway, that's about all I had to say on this subject. I think Ghostbusters Afterlife is overrated and crap, and it's really bad. But Ghostbusters 2016 is great. You should give Ghostbusters 2016 a watch, because it has a lot of funny jokes and like hilarious moments. And again, if you don't like it, it's not necessarily just because you're a sexist. It could be that you don't know what funny is, and you've never watched the original Ghostbusters, and you just use it as a weird talking point, a weird trophy to bat around, like, ugh, Ghostbusters 2016. As for me, I'm able to enjoy a movie, sit through it, and not think about it as like a political chess piece that I can epically pwn the libs with, because I am a lib. That's about all I have to say on the topic. And yeah, Ghostbusters is just a damn interesting franchise, and I find a lot of interesting nuance to it and a lot of interesting points. What are your thoughts on Ghostbusters? Leave them down in the comments. Press the likes, press the subscribes, press the NutriBullet, push the crazy button, and until next time, that's been my review of Ghostbusters and what happened to it. Bustin' makes you feel good. I ain't scared of no ghosts. Keymaster or something.